Yeah, and now 18th unit. So that is another approach of counseling. It is cognitive behavioral approach. Okay. Yeah. Here in this cognitive behavioral approach, there are three important basics in this cognitive behavior approach. It is also known as the CBT. Okay. In cognitive behavior approach, the main basics of this cognitive approach is depending on the learning theories. We have some learning theories. Okay. So why learning theories, the foundations of this cognitive behavior therapy means maladaptive behavior or some odd behavior. Want to modify that behaviors, maladaptive behavior or any problematic behavior, or you can say undesirable behavior. So we follow the principles of learning. As I told you in one previous classes, learning is the modification of behavior through some training and experience. Here we train the patient to modify his behavior in order to learn something from the therapist or from the counselor. The first basic of the CBT, or you can say cognitive behavior therapy, is learning. So there may be important aspects of this theory. One is the learning. Second is the modifying of the behavior or maladaptive behavior. Third is the environmental changes. So these three important terminology we use in this CBT, or you can say cognitive behavior therapy. So,
sir, your voice is low, as well as can you mute others who are not speaking, please?
Is it okay now?
I still can hear some noise from other.
From my side, nothing is there. Everything is smoothly going on here. The voice may from other participants.
Yeah, I mean, you can mute, sir, because you are the host, so you have the control to mute them. I think it is pretty calm now.
Is here, if there is any environmental disturbances from the client side or the patient side, if we observe that environment, maybe the environment of the client, environment of the patient, so that also influence on him. That is the reason his cognitive, means his thought process is somehow deteriorated. So in this scenario, so our as a therapist, our prime responsibility or the way we give the therapeutical process means changing his thought process, number one. Number two, otherwise, if it is not possible to change his thought process, in some cases, like if the IQ level of the person is very low, so that adaptive skills are not there in that, if you don't find any adaptive skills in this patient or the individual, so better to change the environment. We modify the person's behavior or person's thought process, it is okay. Otherwise, better to modify the environment. So here in the cognitive behavior therapy, okay. So cognition is the one important component of the behavior. The first component of the first domain of the behavior is the cognition. Second is the affective. Third is the conative, or you can say psychomotor. Cognition means thought process. If there is any derailment in the deterioration in the thought process, means the patient is not in a position to process the information in his surroundings. Whatever the information from his environment, he is not in a position to processing in a proper way. That is the reason his cognition is not up to the mark. His thought process is not up to the mark. So if his thought process is not up to the mark, automatically it affects on his emotions. That is the second domain. First one is the cognitive domain. Second is the affective domain. Third is the activities, conative, we can say. Okay. So here, these are the three important things we need to understand in providing this type of, in using this type of therapy, that is cognitive behavior therapy. Okay. Cognitive, then affective, then conative, or you can say the activities, you can say behavior. Depending on his cognition, his behavior. If his cognition is not up to the mark, if his cognition, or you can see if his understanding capacity is in a different way, that is the reason he or she behaves in a different way. If he understands negatively, automatically his behavior also in a negative way. Okay. So here in this cognitive behavior therapy, we use some techniques. One is the rational emotive therapy. Rational emotive therapy. What is the rational emotive therapy? Means emotions, whether their emotions, the patient's emotion is not in a rational way or not, logical or not. So rational emotive therapy or rational emotive behavior therapy, also you can REBT or RET. REBT means rational emotive behavior therapy. Why we call it REBT, RET means his emotions, as I mentioned, first is cognition, second is the affective means emotion, third is the behavior or activities, conative, you can say. So here in REBT, if there are any irrational thoughts, we counsel the patient to modify his irrational thoughts. We ask the person or the individual or the patient to think logically, rationally. For example, anger management technique. In anger management technique, anger is one emotion. We have some emotions like positive emotions and negative emotions. Positive emotions we know. This happiness, enjoyment, sociability. Okay. The negative emotions is, first one is the anger. Second is the fear. Third is the jealousy. Fourth is the anxious. Fifth is the disgust. Okay. If these negative emotions, if you find in the patient, if you conclude, if you find this is only the reason of his behavior, so better to ask the person or the patient to think logically in order to change his behavior. If you want to change his behavior, he needs to understand his emotion, or you can say emotional quotient. Nowadays, we are using this emotional quotient, like intellectual quotient and emotional quotient. Means expressing his feelings, his emotions in the right manner. So if he understands, if we develop the insight of the patient, whatever the emotions I am is expressing, these emotions are not, there is no logical behind it. There is no rationality behind it. If we provide that type of insight among the patients, so he will think that irrationality is in his emotions. That is known as the irrational emotions. So as a therapist, as a psychologist, as a counselor, better to ask the patient to think rationally when he shows that type of emotions, when he or she expresses that type of emotions. For example, anger. Anger is one negative emotion. In the anger management technique, what we ask the patient means, what we train up the patient means, what are the consequences by showing that anger? So we ask them to think. That means you are improving the insight of the patient. So that the consequence of anger, maybe anger consequence means in anger management technique, that consequences we explain. One is continuously months together, years together, the same emotional disturbance, or you can say anger is continuing. That means nothing but some tension condition, or you can say anxious conditions. Anxiety will be continuously for months together, years together. If you feel that type of anxious situation in his thought process, what happens means somewhere other way, he will get hypertension. Hypertension is the terminology generally we use in the psychological setups. Whereas the same hypertension, we use the term of BP in the medical setups. Medical terminology, the BP. So we ask the patient to think what are the consequences he or she has to face in the future course of time if he shows this type of anger, or if he faces this type of anxious or stressful conditions. That means we are showing the consequences. One is health concept, or you can say medical, or you can say health conditions. Number one, health consequences. Second is the relations. The relationship maybe somehow it is badly affected by showing this type of irrational emotions, or you can say irrational thoughts, irrational anger. No rationality by showing this type of anger. Yeah, so these consequences we explain to the patient so that he will improve his insight, or she will improve his insight, so that he will modify his behavior. So this is one type of therapy, that means rational emotive behavior therapy. Irrational thoughts leads some sort of negative behavior or odd behavior, or you can say problematic behavior. So if you modify these irrational thoughts, if he think rationally before showing that emotion or anger, whatever the emotion may be, so he will understand if I show this type of irrational emotions, so I need to face so many adverse consequences, maybe the health consequences, financial consequences, relationship consequences. Okay, so this is the way we explain the client to change his thought process, or you can say to improve his insight. That is one aspect. Second, if he or she is not in a position to change his insight, to improve his insight, then what is the next option? Changing the environment. Better to avoid the situation which he or she shows that type of anger or emotional disturbances. So one is the insight improvement. If it is possible, that will be continue. Otherwise, better to change his environment or better to avoid the situation. So these are the things. Then in order to change his behavior, one other technique is the Adc technique, or you can say ABC framework. A means activated event, B is belief system, C is the consequences. What are his activities depending on the belief system? That is the activated event. For example, in some students, or you can say some individuals, they'll habituated with some other drugs, or you can say cigarettes, or like alcohol addiction. So in this alcohol intake, their belief system is that by taking this type of cigarettes in the college premises or somewhere, so that they think they wrongly, they negatively they believe that it is one type of status symbol in some cases. Or by taking some 2 or 3 beers or some alcohol content, so they think some type of relax, some type of this reduction of their anxiety. That is the wrong belief system. They want to reduce the stress. There are some other techniques of stress related, or you can say stress reducer techniques like yoga and like. So, but they wrongly believe that by taking this type of, by taking this number of cigarettes or alcohol or some other this substance, so they feel, they think, they believe, they wrongly believe that we'll have some relaxation. But instead of instead of practicing the relaxation techniques, wrongly they believe that these are the some techniques, some systems to reduce the anxiety or you can say stressful conditions. So here,
sir.
Yes.
Sir, can I ask one question?
Mm-hmm.
See, this is basically the techniques, right? So we come across a lot of people who adapt themselves to wrong coping mechanisms to avoid that problem solving. Mm-hmm. So when they come for counseling, mm-hmm. If we were to do some confrontation that what you are doing is really not good for your health, and we explain them the consequences of doing this. Before all this could happen, first, how can we start with confrontation? They say that what they're doing, right? So we ask them questions, all that, we build the rapport, we get the details, we take some information which is relevant to the problem, all that is over. And then when they say this is what I am doing, first they are confessing what they are doing, and later what sort of questions can we ask? Why are you doing is an attacking question. Already he is in a problem. So instead, how do we frame questions relating to certain bad habits like substance abuse or alcohol abuse, like that?
Yeah. So here, better to explain the consequences. Before explaining the consequences, better to ask the client what are the reasons behind of this drug. Means some, as I mentioned, some patients, or you can say some individuals, they'll explain, sir, I am so and so, I am hard worker, I am a daily labor. So by evening, I'll fed up from work. That is the reason for some relaxation, or you can say some sort of relief. I am taking this type of alcohol or maybe cigarette smoking or any other drugs, any other substances. So better to ask the client, is that really helpful to you? For example, if the person earning is 500 rupees per day.
Sir, here I am referring to those clients who are highly educated, who come from a background of, knowing all the positive and negative consequences of everything. He knows everything. So I'm not talking about the clients who are underprivileged or they're doing things out of ignorance. I'm talking about who knows everything. He's just being, he's not conscious about these things when he is actually getting into this habit. He's just not conscious. So he wants some help.
See, this question is yours, but the answer is to all the some 70 or 80 participants. See, your client may be the high-fi client, but what about the other clients?
I think the first step would be actually making them realize that there is a problem, making them acknowledge that there is a problem. And probably we need to start with that point and try to explain them the consequences and something like that.
First of all, you have to ask their what is the root cause of their intake. Maybe anything. That means their belief system. What the belief system, how they believe by taking this alcohol or cigarettes, whatever the substance may be. So ask them to, I mentioned, improving the insight. Ask them to think, so by taking this number of cigarettes or this quantity of alcohol.
Sir, is it possible for you to mute this number because we are not able to hear you?
Yes, sir.
The one that is coming on screen, if you can mute the person.
Is it okay now?
Yes, sir. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So here, as I mentioned, belief system or maybe insight improvement is most important aspect. After completion of your first and second sessions, if they feel, if they think, if they believe that this is one type of status symbol, number one. Number two, if they think by taking this much of limited quantity, nothing will be happen. That is their way of thinking. If it is limited, like one or two, whatever they explaining, so whatever they think, whatever their this explanation, so better to reduce that two or whatever the quantity may be. So we need to ask the, is it okay if we stop with this limited quantity? Maybe in the whatever the other concept in the future course of time, now we are taking only one cigarette or cigarette, 2 cigarettes. So is it possible to stop within this limitation? That question we can ask, number one. Number two, if we increase the quantity of whatever the substance by intake of their quantity, so if they continuously taking this type of this quantity or this number of cigarettes, what will be the consequences that we can ask the client or the patient. So here the consequences may be, one is the health consequences. So just for example, as I mentioned, if the earning capacity of the person is 500 per month, per day, if he spends 300, 200 rupees only on his alcohol, so what about the other areas of expenditure? That we better to ask the client. If the client is from high-fi society, so what about your other consequences, like your relations in the family, your other health issues, health conditions? So these areas we can focus on. If we ask the client, what about your health? What about your family relations? How you maintaining the relations with your wife or children? So whatever their his opinion on you? These are the multiple areas we need to focus. So the questions of whatever we wanted to ask, depending on his age, depending on his family condition, depending on his socio-economical status, we need to ask the questions. Any doubt here in this area? Anuradha, Murali, somewhere you are asking the questions. Somebody.
Yes, sir. I got it.
Yes.
Sometimes
any psychological issue, always we need to understand these are the socio-demographic systems we need to understand first. Age, for example, maybe he is a business person. For example, he is high-fi society or his class 1 employee. Ask him first, what is your age? For example, if it is 40 years of age, what happens if you reach the age of 45, 50 years? You have any idea about it? That insight we need to develop. That is number one. Number two, what about your this wife? Is she cooperating you in this activities? Is there any concerns of your wife? If she wants to stop this alcohol intake, what are the substance maybe? What about your that is arm's explanation? And what about your children? Are they really happy with your behavior? What are their studies? These are all the things. In any psychological issue, we need to address that issue, keeping in the mind all these areas like his age, his socio-economical status, his job, his workplace, the nature of work. Okay? Yeah.
Yes,
so
sir.
Here in this case of, as I mentioned, in the if he's a laborer, So if he earns 500 rupees per day and 300 rupees he is spending only on his habits, so better to ask him, what about the financial consequence? For example, if you spend 300 rupees per day, monthly it comes around 9,000 rupees. That means financial consequences we better to explain. So monthly it is around at least 9,000 rupees, 300 rupees per day. 9,000 means nearly per year it is around 1,10,000 rupees. Yeah, you can say 1 lakh. Okay, so since how long you have this habit? Means some maybe some 7 years or 8 years. So nearly 8 lakhs rupees you are spending only on this particular, at least you can say it's whatever the substance may be, but you are in your these things. If you would have spend this much of amount in some other area, or if you save this amount, so it will be so helpful. These are the financial consequences. We'll explain to that. Explain means better to ask some questions. These type of questions you can ask. So how much you are spending on your day? On one day, per day you are spending 300 rupees. What will be the roughly you calculate? So monthly, so how much you are spending? Sir, I am spending 9,000 rupees. What will be the yearly this expenditure of this particular area? What about your other expenditure? Your school fees of your children, your rent. These things you can easily ask. So that we are improving the insight from his, not explanation, no need of explanation here in this counseling process. Better to improve the insight of the client or the patient. So roughly he will calculate his basic knowledge. He can easily, or he can easily calculate this much of calculations. After that, so yes, sir, that means you are improving his insight. Yes, sir, it's a blender mistake I am doing. So nearly 8 lakhs I am spending only on this particular it is alcohol. So if we improve this type of insight, so that means you are explaining in a different way, asking some questions, improving his insight, the consequences you are explaining. Like you are improving his insight to understand the consequences from his side, not from our side. Number one. Then what about your health? So health issues also you can explain. If you go to the hospital, what will be the cost of the hospitals nowadays? Then what about the other expenditure? Your children's fees, your rent, and your relations with other members in the family, your relations with the neighbors, so your society. So these are all the various consequences. Be better to ask, be better to improve the insight by explaining of by questioning of these type of questions. Okay, so here the model is that ABC model means. So the belief system is that wrongly he believed that because of my tiredness, because of my stressful conditions, because of my busy schedules, I have this relief. I'll have some sort of relief by taking this alcohol or some any other drugs.
Sir, I have a small question, sir. So when we try to tell them and calculate and say this much amount you're wasting on these things, is there a chance that the person might get defensive and they might not, they develop antagonistic behavior towards the counselor?
No, it's not possible. It's depending on, see, our counseling skills are like that, no? So we need to explain a different way, voice modulation, maybe verbal, non-verbal communication. These are all the various issues, various techniques and skills we have to apply in these cases.
Sir, I think it depends upon the person is more driven towards the id or ego or superego. If he is predominantly having those id qualities, then the counseling process also will take a longer time to convince.
Maybe it will take longer time, no problem. But the counseling process in this way only we have to go. The process may be, instead of taking 10 sessions, maybe 20 sessions. What happens? Okay, you know that 10 to 20 sessions we can, if it is minimum of 10 sessions, maximum 20 sessions. Okay, yeah. Here, see, these are the consequences. In order to change his negative belief system to the positive side, So these are the consequences we will explain him in order to improve his insight. So activated event is taking the any substance depending on the negative belief system. Negative belief system leads to some activated events. That activated events leads to some sort of negative consequence, or you can say adverse consequences. This is one important technique in the CBT. One is rational emotive behavior therapy, you can say RET. Second is the ABC model. And another thing is that, so here, as I mentioned, if we want to change his thought process, one other important technique is not mentioned in our book, somewhere it is there. So CRT, cognitive restructuring. Cognitive restructuring also one major therapy in this model of this behavior therapy, or you can say CBT. Means CRT, as we know, CRT means cognitive restructuring of his thought process. Cognition, as I mentioned, cognition, then cognitive domain. Second is the affective domain. Third is the behavior, you can say cognitive domain. So in the cognition domain, if there is any negative system, or you can need to understand or need to analysis. Okay, so better to restructuring their cognitive, restructuring their thought process, restructuring means no need of changing total thought process. Wherever it is possible, better to restructuring their thought process. That is the cognitive restructuring technique. So that only that part, that analysis, if he or she is in a wrong analysis, for example, even in anger management also, REBT is one technique we use in any emotional that is issues like anger, fear, and some sort of disgust, isolation. So these are some negative emotions. In order to reduce those negative emotions, we use REBT or RET, Rational Emotive Technique. Then, as I mentioned, ABC. Another one is the CRT, Cognitive Restructuring Technique. So in the cognitive restructuring techniques, so here in the cognitive, what are the thought process? We better restructuring the thought process. Okay, so so here some examples are also given in your this thing. So here I must do well and win the approval of others for my performance. That is one statement of wrong cognitive model. Means I have to get approval from all other members in my group. Is it possible? So I must appreciate from all the group members in my group.
No, sir, it is.
That is the reason that is negative cognition. You can say cognitive restructuring is needed here in this case. His cognition is not up to the mark. Now all members, it's not so easy to get approval from all the members in the group. If you think I must have approval from all the members, I must have appreciation of all the members. So these are not, these things are not possible. So better to restructuring this type of thought process. That means cognitive restructuring of the thought process. Then other techniques of this one is the psychoeducation. Psychoeducation means psychological education. Or you can see what are the psychological issues. For example, generally the psychoeducation generally we use in the psychiatric setup. Psychoeducation, for example, if the person is having some acute issue like schizophrenia or any type of mania and psychosis, or you can say cases. So psychoeducation we need to provide to the caregivers. Means, for example, if it is schizophrenia, so some sort of hallucinations and that is delusions. So because of these hallucinations and delusions, the patient may not be in a position to understand his condition. Okay, so acceptance is very low in these cases. So there will be no any acceptance. Acceptance is a crucial role in any psychological counseling, because if we or the person or patient is accept his condition, then only he will cooperate. Otherwise, he won't cooperate. He will sometimes he will means he won't come to you. So here acceptance is an important thing. So in these cases, cases, as I mentioned, the schizophrenia and other conditions, acceptance is not that much. Acceptance may not be possible in these conditions. In this type of patients, better to psycho-educating the caregivers, like, or you can say parents. Psychoeducation means psychological education. What are the consequences, or you can say positive symptoms or negative symptoms of that particular issue, or you can say problem. For example, schizophrenia, there are some positive symptoms, there are some negative symptoms. Positive symptoms means hallucinations and delusions. Okay, negative symptoms means they won't take meal properly, they won't maintain the hygienic condition. These are the negative symptoms of the patient. So this type of education in this particular case, in this particular issue, in this particular problem of psychological, like schizophrenia and psychosis, and you can say OCD cases, better to educate the caregivers. Psycho-education is also one of the important technique in this CBT. CBT is, as I mentioned, CBT is the whole, it is a broad term. In CBT, there are so many other therapies. As I mentioned, some 3 or 4 therapies. Okay, so here in this thing, one important, as I mentioned, one important thing is that if there is any maladaptive behavior, modify his behavior to the adaptive systems, adaptive behavior, you can say adaptive way of understanding the environment. So in this adaptive behavior, if the person is in a position to change his behavior, okay, that means if it is possible to improve the insight of the person or the patient, we can easily improve the insight. If it is not possible, better to change the environment. As you know, in your first year third paper, that is psychopathology, there are 2 important therapeutical procedures. One is the insight therapies. Second is the initial pages of your first, that is third paper. In the first unit itself, there are 2 important therapeutical procedures. Broadly, the therapies are 2 main therapies. One is the insight therapy, therapies of improving insight. Second is the supportive therapies. Insight therapies and the supportive therapy. Insight therapy means improving the insight of the patient so that we will modify his behavior. I can easily restructuring of his thought process, that is improving the insight. Second, if the insight is not possible, what to do? Supportive therapy means changing the environment. As I mentioned, the chronic cases like schizophrenia, psychosis, and OCD cases, mania and bipolar cases. So insight improving is not that much at least. That is the reason, instead of using that therapeutical procedures of insight, we use supportive therapy. Supportive therapy means changing the environment, altering the environment to the patient. That is known as the supportive therapies. Okay, so here supportive therapy means one type of techniques we use, well, some type of counseling procedures we use on the caregiver, or the parents of the child, caregivers. For example, any ADHD case. In ADHD cases, is it possible to change the behavior of the child, small child? It's not so easy. That means here improving the insight is not so easy. Like if he is an autistic child or ADHD or some sort of childhood disorders like development delays, autism cases, ADHD cases, Down syndrome. Okay, so here insight improving that much not easy. So better to use the therapies of support, or you can say supportive therapy, changing the environment. So here cognition is, here the cognitive restructuring is not for the patient. The support is to the caregivers, or you can say parents or the family members. It means you are changing the environment of the family environment. If it is a school environment, it's better to change the school environment. That is the reason the special schools, some special methods, special teaching methods, special devices, special techniques, some sort of devices, some sort of techniques we use to support to the special needed children. As we know, there are different types of education systems. One is normal education system. Second is the inclusive education system. Third is the special education system. Normal schools, inclusive schools, and special schools. In these special schools, so special curriculum which will be the suitable to the special needed children. Yeah, this all comes under the behavioral techniques and some sort of rational, emotive, or you can say rational techniques. Here, some other these things methods are given also given in this book. That is therapeutical techniques. One is cognitive method, deputing the irrational beliefs, as I mentioned. Then doing cognitive homework. Why the cognitive homework means some sort of restructuring technique we explain to the client so that some homework they need to do. For example, one example I'll give you. So in some cases, they think that I am not worthy, I am worthlessness. So I don't have that much of abilities to cope up with my family members. As I mentioned, so nobody is supporting me. So these type of negative thoughts in their negative cognition, if you observe, better to give some sort of cognitive homework. Cognitive homework means, so whatever your positives, you better to list out your positives. That homework we will give to the client. So you list out your positives, you list out your negatives. What are the things you wanted to change from your side? So this type of homework, that means doing cognitive homework. Then changing one's language, so assertive language, assertive manner of conversation. So that also we will apply to the, we will explain to the person. Then as I mentioned, some sort of role playing. Role playing means, so ask the one other technique also, the visualization. If you stop this alcohol addiction, so you just visualize yourself how the others will respect you. Now, what is the relation? What about the relations now? So, what about the relations in the next future courses? So, if you stop this taking drugs, so your financial stability, how it will be? For example, now, your expenditure is, you are spending 300 rupees per day now. If you stop taking this type of alcohol, this type of substance using, so what will be your saving amount per month? Sir, I am nearly 9,000 rupees I am spending only on this particular thing. So I will save nearly 9,000 to 10,000 per month. So in your that is home, what is the needed? So sir, I don't have even TV also in my home. So better to purchase a TV. So these we can easily have some sort of life in a different way. This type of visualization techniques you can say. Okay, so role play. These are all the various techniques we explain to the client so that you can understand. So you can reduce his intake of cigarettes or maybe any other alcohol, right? So these are all the various techniques we use in the cognitive behavior therapy, CBT. Okay. Then next one is the humanistic approach. As we are already discussed in the previous initial these units, Carl Rogers given the prominent role to the person. So here, these humanistic approach, there are some important basics of this humanistic approach. One is the self-concept. Second is the self-realization. Third is the self-awareness. Fourth is the self-actualization. So he believes that Carl Rogers believes that person or you can people are trustworthy. Then they are all resourceful and they are having their capabilities, but they won't understand their capabilities. So in this person, we know the person-centered, the main therapy in this humanistic approach is the person-centered therapy. Though the human nature, he explained in a different way. So no need of your explanation to the human. He know his capabilities. He know his resources. But whether he or she is using his resource or not, that is the matter in this technique. So the human is the trustworthy. People are trustworthy, resourceful, capable of self-understanding and self-direction. Okay. So only thing is we direct them from his perspective, not from our perspective. Understanding his capabilities, understanding his resources, ask them to understand his resources, ask them to understand his capabilities, ask them to understand their directions so that he can easily direct on his own. That means self-directions. So in this humanistic approach, so these are the main concepts of Carl Rogers. So in order to improve his insight, ask them to utilize their resources in a proper way. Ask them to utilize their capacity in a right way so that they will have the self-direction. And one more important thing is here in the humanistic approach, as I mentioned, the base of the person-centered therapy is the humanistic approach. Person-centered therapy means, as we discussed in the previous classes, there are three important types of counseling. One is the directive counseling. Then how you are giving the counseling. Based on this, there are three important counseling types. One is the directive counseling. Second is the non-directive counseling. Third is the eclectic counseling, or you can say mixed counseling. So here in the person-centered therapy, most of the sessions we use the non-directional counseling type, non-directional counseling skills we use here. This means non-directional means because as we mentioned here in this theory, so the person is having knowledge, the person is having some resources, the person is having some sort of capabilities, resources. So only we need to give some directions to understand his knowledge, understand his capacity, understand his resources. Okay, so here non-directional counseling is, you can use the non-directional counseling in this person-centered therapy. Then another three important things that is mentioned in this therapy, that means counseling, that is client-centered therapy, is that genuineness, then congruency, empathy, the unconditional positive regard. So congruence means, genuineness means the problem should be a genuine problem. The person should be genuineness of the problem, genuineness of the person, genuineness of the process. These things we need to understand first. Number two is the congruency. What are the solutions we are giving? That should be congruent to the age of the client, congruent to the status of the client, whether these techniques are practically, is it possible to apply these techniques or not? This type of congruency we need to understand. Okay, so I can say congruency in a different way. Congruency from the person side, congruency from the therapist side, congruence from the application part. Okay, so here congruent, for example, one example I'll give you. In some cases, if whatever the techniques we use, what are the suggestions we use, if these suggestions are not practically possible, practically these suggestions, these applications are not possible, that means incongruence. we are using incongruence techniques. Congruency means whatever the suggestions we give to the client, that should be practicable, should be there. That is, that should be some sort of feasibility. So the patient should be in a position to apply your suggestion, to follow your suggestions. Okay, that is one important thing we need to understand while we are giving suggestions to the client. Okay, here there are two important things we need to understand in this client-centered therapy. Two persons are main in the psychological contact. One is the person, that is therapist.
Client.
Yeah, if you want to say it is a client, he is not in a congregant. Incongruence, if we find incongruence in the client, so that we will change his incongruence thoughts to the congruence level. That means irrelevant thoughts to the relevancy. Okay, so but the person is in the state of incongruence. Second is he is in the vulnerable condition, or you can say anxious conditions. So that is the first one. Second is the person, that means the therapist. He is in the congruent. He is in the integrated relations with the other. We are supposed to integrate all the various aspects of the client so that some sort of broad solution you can give. Or you can say the one important technique here in this client-centered therapy is also, that is Gestalt therapy. Gestalt means, we know that Gestalt therapy is the
it is whole is important, not
yes.
just the parts of
he may not, the client may be, because he is in the vulnerable condition, he is in the anxious state. That is the reason he is not in a position to coordinate all the various capacities of the client. As a therapist, that is our responsibility to utilize this type of Gestalt techniques to ask him to see all the various capabilities in a holistic manner. Got it? So here, so if you show this type of holistic ways, holistic manner in coordinating of all the various capabilities of the various resources of the client, so that he can understand, yeah, I'm not in a position to, that is the reason I am not utilizing these resources. That is the reason I am not utilizing my capabilities. That is the reason I am somewhere. So if as a therapist, if you coordinate all those things, if we ask the client to utilize in a different way, so that you are improving his insight by integrating of all various resources of the client. That means holistic manner we are doing. So here in this case, one another technique is the unconditional positive regard. So that the therapist experiences unconditional positive regard towards the client, no conditions from our side. Because as I mentioned, the basic concepts of the humanistic approach is every person is having some trustworthy. So they have their own capabilities. But problem is that they are not in a position to understand their own capability. That is the reason we are improving the insight here. Or you can say one important method is the introspection. Ask her to introspect on his own, to see in his own or in her own, so that they can easily understand what is there in their that is in their personality, what are the positive qualities. So here, unconditional positive regard towards the client. No conditions from our side. We are open to listen. Then empathetic understanding. Empathetic understanding means understanding from the client's perspective, not from our perspective. He or she is in the anxious situation. That is the reason. He or she is in the stressful condition. That is the reason she or he is not in a position to identify their own abilities. So if we understand from their side, that is known as the empathetic understanding. Okay, this type of empathy we are supposed to use in this person-centered therapy. Why we call it as a person-centered therapy means, so whatever the procedures we follow in the person-centered therapy, only depending on the person. So person is main here in the humanistic approach. The person's capabilities, the person's resources, the person's abilities. Okay, so these things always we keep in mind. That is the reason we use this type of techniques. Like person is the vulnerable condition. That is the thought. That is the reason his thought process is in the incongruence, no congruency in his thought process. The person is in the vulnerable condition. That is the reason he or she is not in a position to understand his own capabilities or resources. So as a therapist, we use these various techniques to improve his self-realization or self-awareness, creating some sort of awareness in the client to identify his positives as well as his negatives, so that he will improve his positives and also he or she will reduce their negative thoughts. And in some cases, needs may not be fulfilled. That may be one of the root cause of their anxious conditions, their vulnerable conditions. If it is such that cases, better to ask them whether their psychological needs or some sort of physiological needs are fulfilled or not. For example, in some cases, if the love and affection is not up to the mark from the parent side, as we mentioned, as we know that some stages of needs, or you can say human needs, as Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs, some basic needs. Some needs are related to the safety and security, and some needs are related to love and affection. Some needs are related to identity and respect. If these basic needs are not fulfilled, like security and safety and security is not fulfilled in the particular age from the parents, from the siblings, some type of anxiety, it will increase in the client. If it is such that cases, so you need to show empathy. That is the reason he is not in a position to understand his abilities. In some cases, need of identity and respect is not fulfilled in the particular age. That is the reason they always think in a different way, negative way. Worthlessness. So if it is such that cases, we need to find out the root cause of that particular behavior. They feel of their feeling of trust, worthlessness. So in that cases, better to understand from that particular side, that means from the client's perspective, that means empathical understanding. So that whatever the suggestions we wanted to give to the client, so in order to reduce their anxiety, we easily will show the client this is the reason of your negative feelings, or you can say negative thoughts, or maybe worthlessness in your thought process. Okay, so these are all various methods we use, keeping in mind the various conditions, vulnerable conditions of the client. Any doubt here?
Sir, I have a small doubt. When counseling is done, the person, whoever he is, when the person is saying his problem, he might not be giving the whole picture, no, sir. He might be only telling the problem from his perspective. Actually, the whole picture might be something else. So based on what the person is saying without knowing the entire situation, if we try to give any, counseling cannot be 100% correct, no, sir.
Counseling may not be 100% correct. How can you say 100% correct?
No, sorry. Maybe I did not frame the question properly. For example, there is some, in a marital issue, there is some problem when the person comes for counseling. And he might be saying from his own perspective that this is my problem, these are my problems, without telling what he is doing to the other person. So in that case, how will the how do we handle the situation?
That means you are talking about they are hiding something. They may chance of hiding something. That's your question.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Sometimes, see, very good question. Sometimes recently I'm handling one this type of marital issues. They are intentionally. Some may intentionally hide the things because of that they don't know actually what to tell. Sometimes they want intentional. They may hide the things. For example, if you ask the wife, she will tell, no, sir, no problem from my side. Okay, I'm all right. So problem is with the husband side. He is not giving that much of importance. He is giving more importance to the parents. That is the recent case I am discussing. This is one type of case study I am discussing. No, so recently they got married some 10 to 12 months back. Recently, 1 year even, not even 1 year. So the concern is that he has to give importance. He has to give importance, but he is not giving that much of importance, but he is giving the importance to the parents and some other family members. That is number one. Number two, there is a difference between the family environment of the both. So she is from the this high-fi society, the same social background, but thing is that she has some established family. She is from the established family, having very good financial status. Whereas the other side is not that much of financial status compared to this his lady or wife. Number two. Okay, first one is she felt that her feeling is that not important, that much of importance compared to the other members in the family. That is number one. Number two is that, so here for every aspect, whenever I want to go outside, he will give this much of amount, like 500,000 rupees of amount. But in my family, in my previous state of that is in my previous lifestyle is entirely different. My financial status. Here the problem is the financials. Third is the some type of conflicts in their day-to-day life. Okay, so that is the concerns of the one side. Second side is that the husband, he wants his wife to cooperate each and every aspect, not only to him, her cooperation, her relations. He's more concerned about the relations, not only with him, relations to the other members in the family. That means his parents. Is it possible? The same type of cooperation, the same type of time spending to his family members also? She is also working woman. So these, see why I am taking this type of example means, so they are hiding something. This hiding, you are talking about that, your question is that whether they explain in a proper way or not. Transparency is there or not, maybe there or not. That is your question. So in some cases, wantedly, intentionally, they may hide something. But as a therapist, that is our responsibility, that is our way of giving counseling, to identify those blind spots also. This is known as the identifying the blind spots. One is that intentionally, if they wanted to hide the things, those blind spots also we can easily identify. So better to ask the questions in order to identify the blind spots. Definitely, they will be in a position to explain those things also. That is our...
Sir, I think it comes to the basic relationship between the client and the counselor. If they really trust the counselor to an extent that they can open up on anything, mostly they wouldn't hide. At least in the 5th or 6th session, they will open up. Otherwise, see, the very purpose of they coming to the counseling is to have some help, no, sir. So if they hide, they are actually fooling themselves out. So if they trust the counselor, then they will open up. Again, it comes to the basic fact that the counselor is in congruent position and the client is not congruent. So therefore, he needs those things, whatever he is hiding, he has to open up, is what I think.
Yeah, yes. So it is our another important thing is that is our skill, that is our counseling process, to build up the rapport within 1 or 2 sessions. So that if they really want some solution, definitely, if they believe on the counseling process, if they trust on the counselor, definitely one way or other way, they will open up. But in some cases, intentionally, they may hide the things. That is our part to identify those blind spots, asking some questions related to those blind spots. Definitely, they will share those things also. They'll, what are the feelings, what are the emotions, what are the instincts, what are the factors that influencing them to hide the things. Got it?
Yeah, sir. Clear. Thank you.
Yeah. Those things also definitely they will explain, they will share.
Also, sir, usually what happens is, when we integrate some of the techniques of different therapies, it calibrates to something like, the client uses the slip of the tongue. He doesn't want to tell, but he just says it without, it does happen unconsciously. So that slip of the tongue can be a clue for us to identify the blind spots.
Yes, even slip of the tongue. For example, if we as yesterday we discussed so many things related to the psychoanalytical approach. If the slip of the tongue is also one of the main cue to identify the blind spots. So if something is there in the unconscious material, sometimes, as I mentioned, sometimes they may not be in a position to identify what is there in the unconscious state, unconscious level. So in this different techniques like slip of the tongue, or you can say dream analysis, or sometimes some other techniques. Okay, so these unconscious, they wanted to explain, but they may not be in a position to explain it properly. That means they're not in a position to identify those things in their unconscious level. That is our process, that is our role, that is our responsibility to have that last layer also. We need to tap it. And one more thing, if it is a one-to-one counseling, their verbal or non-verbal communication also may give some sort of cues, some sort of cues to some sort of information to the therapist. If it is one-to-one counseling, or if it is a online counseling or telephonic counseling, you can easily identify the voice modulation. If something is hiding or not, you can, as a therapist, if we have that sort of skills in counseling practices, definitely they will identify those blind spots also. What are the hidden material in the unconscious? As I mentioned, maybe sometimes maybe intentionally they wanted to hide the things, or some sort of what is ignorance. They don't know how to explain those things. As I mentioned, because of their vulnerable condition, because of their stressful or anxious status, that is the reason. Maybe sometimes. So anyway, that is maybe the pointedly, intentionally, or due to their conditions, if they are not explaining. But here, everything, every material, what are the material, what are the things in the hidden thoughts, or you can say unconscious layer, unconscious status, that also we need to address those issues also. For example, if there are any emotional disturbances, the emotions disturbances because they wanted to explain something, but they may not be explained those things, but some different way you can express, they can explain. There are also some slip of the tongue. You can have some sort of, they can have some sort of slip of. You can easily identify the slip of the tongue. It itself is the major information. It gives the major information to the therapist.
Sir, I want to contribute one point. As somebody who's been doing therapy for quite some time now, one of the important things I've learned from my experience is that every session, the therapist needs to be as calm and mindful as possible. Then you can pick up the vibrations, the verbal and the non-verbal cues which are coming from the client very, very easily. So we have to become shunya. I mean, in the sense, we have to be as mindful as possible. You can pick up the vibrations of the client, and you will also know from, like you said, the vocal and the non-verbal, verbal. I mean, from everything, you will know, what exactly the client is saying, to what extent that person is, telling what is actually there, and to what extent he is deviating from the truth or whatever. So it's easy to, pick up the non-verbals much more when we are calm and when we go.
Yes. Means you are talking about the verbal, sometimes verbal communication. Or even non-verbal cues also. Non-verbal communication also gives a lot of information from the client side. It will be so helpful.
Yes. And also, sir, one last point is our intuition will come into play. We'll know what to do and what tool to use when we are very mindful and cool at that point of time.
Yes. You're talking about the, from the client side, no?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I'm talking about from the therapist side, sir. The therapist has to approach this every session in a very mindful state.
Yes, that is listening skills. As I mentioned, listening is most important. Listening,
yes, sir.
Listening, mindfulness means listening. Mindfulness is one important thing. That means mindfulness is a different concept. Mindfulness is observing his own side from our side.
Yeah. So here, what I'm talking about is us being very calm and coming to the session in a very calm and calm state of body and mind.
See, as here the psychologist must have so much of memory and that is concentration, focusing. These are the most important aspects from the most important skills from the therapist side. Active listening. Each and every aspect, each and every part, each and every word of the client is most important. Maybe verbal or non-verbal, especially in verbal or non-verbal, both sides. So our observation is so important, no? That see, as here in our first year also, there are some basic methods of psychology. The first method of psychology is the introspection. Introspection means seeing in his own self. That is the first method of psychology, the basic methods of psychology, introspection. Second is the observation, no? Observation. Observation means observing the client. It's a natural setup, no? Again, we have some different types of observation. That is natural observation, then control observation, then participant observation, non-participant observation. Here in the counseling process, direct observation, natural observation. In this observation, you can easily find some issues related to the client. And by observing, keen observation means listening and observation. By observing the client, his movements, his emotions, his gestures, these are all comes under non-verbal. And some sort of verbal communication. We can easily understand whether he is or she is hiding something, whether he is genuine in explaining his or her emotions or not, whether he is congruent or not. Because of this stressful condition, maybe not be congruent, but genuineness, whether they are hiding anything or not. So there all comes under observation. We are there, live observation. That means natural observation. In this live observation, natural observation, if you find something, in order to confirm those things, then third method. That is the third method is, as I mentioned, third method is that is experimental method, using some sort of tools. First one is the introspection, improving the insight. Whether they are in this humanistic approach is that no, improving the insight means introspection. Identifying their own abilities. some cases, in some cases, though they have some abilities, but they may not be in a position to understand their ability. That is the reason they're lagging behind in their professional setup. And that is one reason. Second is because of their vulnerable condition, they are not in a position to identify their own abilities. Here, by improving the insight, that means by using the introspection method, improving the insight of the client. Once we improve the insight, that is the reason that is the reason counseling is, there is a difference between the counseling and the guidance. Guidance means only for that particular issue they will come to the person. He will guide the client to do these things in this manner. That's it. But no empowerment in the guidance. But whereas once the client is come to the therapist, in order to resolve those issues, in order to address the issue of the client, we need to empower, we need to improve the insight of the client, so that whatever the other issues, he or she himself will be in a position to resolve those issues. That means empowerment. That is the difference between the guidance and the counseling. For only one issue, they'll come to you in the guidance. We will resolve that issue. We will guide the client to resolve those issues, and he will go. He won't come to you again. But whereas in the counseling, in order to resolve that particular issue, in order to address that issue, we will improve the insight. These are your abilities. You identify these abilities first. So that first step is that identifying the abilities, identifying the resources, identifying the capabilities. Once he or she identified, or you can say, if he recognizing his own abilities, what is the next step? He or she will be in a position to utilize those abilities. When it is possible, when we improve the insight, then only it is possible. For example, as I mentioned yesterday, in counseling, in the educational counseling or vocational counseling, so after using some like DBDA or any other tool, so they wanted to take some other group in their further advanced courses, like intermediate or any other graduation courses, or even in engineering also, some sort of conflict, some sort of confused state, they will go through, the students will go through, whether they wanted to take CEs at the ECE or at least mechanical engineering or it is computer engineering or ECE, whatever, civil engineering like that. Here they'll have some sort of confused state. So first of all, ask them, what is your area of interest? Here the counseling is needed. Means identifying their own abilities by asking some questions, or by observation, or by using some tools. We explain them, we will ask them to identify our own abilities. You have, for example, the completion of their schooling, they wanted to join in intermediate. So here they came to the counseling, that is educational counseling process, to choose a group in the intermediate level. So he is not up to the mark in the mathematics, but by force of the parents or some other siblings, he wanted to take the mathematics or MPC group in the intermediate level. So you just ask him his drawing skills, for his hard work, his area of interest, basing on the subject's marks. So if he or she is having some sort of drawing skills, he or she is ready to do some hard work, and he or she is ready to go for other this area of scientists or something like that. So better to suggest them to opt the group of BPC. So this is the way we have to ask them to identify their abilities. That means improving the insight. Though they have the capabilities, but they may not be in a position to identify those abilities. Here also, we need to improve the insight of the client. So in various areas, like maybe the career counseling, maybe the occupational counseling, it may be the educational counseling, or in the area of these family issues. So these various techniques we are supposed to use in order to improve their insight. As I mentioned, broadly there are two important therapeutic procedures. One is the insight therapies. Second is the supportive therapy. If insight therapy is not possible in some specific cases, better to use some therapies which provide some support system to the client. But here in the humanistic approach, the main focus is only on the person. That is known as, that is the reason we are calling it is a person-centered therapy. Person-centered therapy. His attitude, his aspirations, his interest, his area of interest, his educational status, his capacities, his resources, keeping all these various domains. So better to give the counseling to the particular client or the person. That is the reason we are calling it as a client-centered therapy or person-centered therapy. These are the main basic points we need to keep in mind. One is the congruency. Second is the empathy. Third is the unconditional positivity. No conditions from the therapist. We are open because our duty, our responsibility is that empower the person, because already he is having some abilities. Just we need to ask them to identify those abilities. And as I mentioned, if they identify those abilities, automatically will be in a position to utilize those things. Most of the cases, in some cases, at least some cases, the client is having that capabilities, that competencies, but the problem is that he or she may not be in a position to identify his own, because always what happens if the insight is not up to the mark? What happens nowadays? There are so many cases like that. They don't want to see on his own or on her own. Always they'll see the others. Got it? What happens if we see the others? We will forget us. We won't find our own things. Yeah. That is the problem nowadays. We are always habituated to see the others. But when
yes, sir, acceptance from others nowadays the people waiting and expecting, right?
Yeah. So acceptance will be reduced here. There will be no acceptance. If we won't see ourselves, if we won't see in our own self, what happens? We won't accept. If, for example, if the person is having 104, 105 temperature, but still he won't accept I am having some problem, what happens? He won't go to the doctor. He won't consult the doctor. If he or she accepts, yes, I have this much of temperature, 103, 104, because I have some problem. That is then only they will come to the doctor. The same thing here also. So first of all, improving the insight is the main, or you can say acceptance levels. Improving the acceptance levels is the main task in this therapy. So,
sir, I have a question, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, like in this like psychological sense, if we see many of like our friends or our family members with some psychological issue, and how do we explain them? Sometimes they don't even accept, and then they just move on suffering. We see the suffering, and we won't be able to stay calm and quiet. But can we tell them that you need some therapy or you need?
That means you are talking about the initial stages. You are talking
okay,
about
to tell them that, sir. Initial
stage. You are talking about the initial stage. So how to take them to the counseling process? That is your question, I think.
Yes, sir. Exactly. That's my
question. Yes. So if the family members help, or some other group members help, better to explain the consequences of this issue. If you keep on facing the same problem for months together or years together, what will be the consequences in the near future of in the future course of it? So that one way or other way, they'll accept, yes, my problem is with this issue. Then ask them to come to the counselor, or by phone also you can consult the client or caregivers. Generally, what happens, they won't accept the, for example, in some family issues, the wife is having some complaints on the husband. The other side also complaining the other side. So here, better to ask the wife or husband. So he will say, no problem with the with myself. No problem. Your problem is with your wife only. Okay, I'll talk to the wife also. First, I'll talk to you. What are the complaints I want to listen your complaint. So likewise, you can approach the one side. If you approach the one side, if you got that chance of around 40 or 45 minutes, here we are supposed to utilize our counseling skills, so that some sort of trust on you. You'll have some trust on you. He or she will have some sort of trust on you. Then better to have one more session to the same person, then go to the actual issue. Got it?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Got it. First thing, we need to explain the consequences,
So
the health issues.
You need to interfere in the issue. You need to involve in the issue. They are not ready to come to the client. So better to involve yourself with other family members.
Sure, sir. Sure. Got it. Thank you.
Yeah. So with that, we will conclude the session today. I think next 2 weeks there will be no any classes. I think next will be on 16th of April. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Next 2 weekends, there is no class. Yeah.
No classes.
That's what in the schedule also they have mentioned that. Yeah.
Yeah. So we have another 3 classes. Then 16th and 17th, I think. 23rd, I think. So there are 3 classes. We have nearly 5 to 6 units. No problem. We'll complete the units within these 3 classes. Otherwise, if you are ready to take, if you are okay, I'll take 1 or 2 sessions more. Okay. So we'll see. Okay.
Okay, sir. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Yes.
Thank you.